This video wouldn't fly without Squarespace. This is the Sukhoi Superjet, the pride of Russian civil aviation. What started as one of the most promising projects of the modern Russian aviation industry ended up as a painful lesson on aircraft development. But how the hell did Sukhoi, the premier Russian aircraft developer, famous for building some of the best fighter jets in the world, end up messing up and even losing the production of this aircraft? This is the story between the rise and the ultimate downfall of the first Russian modern airliner. Welcome to the year 2000, and it looks like you would like to fly a regional route with Aeroflot. Your options are 1. Noisy, 2. A flying coffin, or 3. An American capitalist aircraft. So naturally, a burning question for the 21st century was, how would Russia compete with the likes of Boeing and Airbus and also build a safe modern airliner that could service the vast domestic market and become an export success? The answer was, not so obvious. The issue was that the only similar medium-range aircraft that compiled with European ICAO standards was the Tupolev 204, but the production of this aircraft was stalling, and in 10 years of service, only 20 airframes had actually been delivered. The second issue was, the whole of Russia was actually lagging behind the West. The 1990s destroyed the economy and especially the aviation industry in Russia, and several interesting and prospective projects were either stopped or lagged behind schedule, all while the US and European companies dominated the market. But there was one shining star in the dark Russian skies of the year 2000, and that star was called Sukhoi. Part of the problem with bringing a brand new aircraft to the market is how you advertising it. I know that the team behind the Superjet tried their best, but I think they would have sold more aircraft if they had used today's sponsor, Squarespace. That's right, the same power that's behind my merch store at www.foundandexplained.shop is Squarespace's new AI-powered blueprint builder. Squarespace allows you to launch a professional, sleek website in just a few steps with no coding or design experience needed. Their award-winning templates and easy to drag and drop editing makes it effortless to keep a brand looking first class. And just like air traffic control guiding planes to their destinations, Squarespace's built-in SEO tools also help new visitors come to websites with optimized meta descriptions, automatic sitemaps, and much more. So whether you're launching your own brand new commercial aircraft or selling aviation gear like me, Squarespace makes it simple, stylish, and stress-free. And best of all, I can get you and the team at Sukhoi 10% off your first site and domain at www.squarespace.com/found. The Sukhoi Bureau gained fame during the Soviet era, building some of the most meanest fighters like the Su-27, and even though the USSR fell apart, their economic success continued through the 1990s crash. With aircraft like the Su-30, they managed to secure a number of export contracts and get those sweet dollars to fund their research of the next-gen aircraft, which was tested at the time under the name of the Su-47 Perkut. Yes, that one with the backwards wings. There we have a video right here on the channel. So in the year 2000, Sukhoi was the de facto most successful aircraft developer in Russia, but they went a step ahead because the move into the civilian market and filling the void between the Soviet airliners and modern Western aircraft could be highly lucrative for this powerhouse titan. So they built this. After being formally greenlit in 2003, the Sukhoi Civil Aircraft subsidiary developed and flew the first prototype in only 4 years. This was the time when Russia and the Western countries had pretty good relations, so Sukhoi was able to use a lot of foreign components to build this jet, which would actually prove to be fatal for the project down the line, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Using the foreign-made components, however, did speed up the certification process in Europe, which was critical for the export plans, and also part of the reason why they were able to get a prototype in only 4 years. It's actually super brilliant. This would speed up the development of the aircraft as a whole because there wouldn't be any delays because of certain parts of the aircraft falling behind schedule. And last but not least, many of the companies that Sukhoi actually sourced parts from were actually well versed in the aircraft industry and were existing suppliers for Boeing and Airbus, so they already had commercial grade products available. The Sukhoi Superjet 100, or SSJ 100, is a sleek looking airliner with a classic engines in underwing nacelles approach. But in total, some 50% of the components, all the way from the heart of the aircraft, from the cockpit to the engines, was developed or built abroad. Thales from France developed the cockpit and part of the avionics, the French Safran Corporation provided the landing gear, the German Liebherr flight controls, and US provided the APU from Honeywell. The engines also bear the name SAM 146, and that was jointly developed by the Russian Saturn Corporation and the French Snecma. And then the French themselves actually based the design off the CFM 56 engine, a proven and widely used engine at that point, and the Russians were in charge of developing the low pressure section of the engine and its installation onto the airframe. Sukhoi even contacted the famous Italian designer company, Pininfarina, to design the cabin. So to wrap it up, in 2007, the SSJ 100 prototype was ready for ground tests, and in 2008 it took to the skies for the first time, with a very optimistic plan for initial deliveries to start in 2009. Namely for the first 2 carriers to order this jet, Russia's Aeroflot and the Armenian airline Armavia. But even though it was a smooth ride up to this point with all these Western-made components, this is where the cracks started to show. In 2009, with the prototype flying, the certification process in Europe began. The SSJ 100 was shown off at the Paris Air Show, which, with certification just around the corner, secured it an order for 30 aircraft from a Hungarian airline. And it was only in 2012, when the aircraft received the necessary European certification to fly in Europe, that things started to look up. Alas, when it entered service, problems started immediately, namely with the engines. Both Aeroflot and Armavia had issues and found themselves flying far less than their projected numbers. However, this jet was actually quite cheap, and because the price was standing around 40 to 50 million US dollars compared to 80 million for the Airbus A220 or 50 to 60 million for the Embraer E-Jet 2 family, it was still quite popular with budget airlines and airlines not from the West. So despite these troubling engine issues, the planes were starting to move off the shelves. Well, until 2014, when sanctions were imposed to Russian companies and individuals because of their involvement in the war in Ukraine and the annexation of Crimea. And remember how I said that the SSJ was made up of about 50% of foreign-made parts? Well, sourcing those parts became a huge issue because the West was not comfortable sending them to Russia. But this wasn't the only major issue around that time that was starting the downward trend of this airline. Despite initial optimism, the Sukhoi Superjet struggled to gain a significant traction in the global market. It had a very limited customer base. One of the reasons for this was the lack of established international customer support infrastructure, which made airlines hesitant to invest in the aircraft. It's hard to buy a plane that can only be essentially repaired in Russia from foreign-made parts from the West. Do you see how the equation doesn't make sense? Initially, Sukhoi planned around 800 aircraft to be built, which was then cut back to 600 as it entered service. But the SSJ 100's entry into the market coincided with a period of economic uncertainty within Russia and many parts of the world, which made airlines even more cautious about purchasing a new and unproven aircraft. And furthermore, the SSJ 100 faced stiff competition from well-established players in the regional aircraft sector, such as Bombardier's CRJ series and Embraer's E-Jet series. These competitors had a more proven track record, extensive support networks around the world, and greater market penetration, making it difficult for the Superjet to secure orders. Now, I know a lot of you are wondering about the safety of this aircraft, because as of December 2024, the SSJ-100 has been involved in 95 recorded incidences, including 5 hull losses leading to 89 fatalities. But the analysis has indicated that it was human error, technical failures, and operational issues as the contributing factors rather than inherent design flaws of the aircraft. Geopolitical factors, such as the international sanctions on Russia at the moment with their aviation manufacturers, could actually impact future maintenance and operational reliability of the airframe. But right now, we can say that this aircraft's fundamental design is considered safe. But we'll have to see how this changes going into the future. But despite all of this, if we take a look at the numbers between 2014 and 2018, the number of orders was actually growing steadily and the production pace was ramping up. But then right at the end of that, in 2017, serious maintenance problems started affecting the operators of this aircraft, such as the Irish CityJet and the Mexican Interjet, both companies located outside of Russia. Again, going back to that pattern. This was so bad that it soon led to cannibalization of several airframes to keep these fleets airworthy. Sukhoi, backed by the Russian government, agreed to move its focus to building an effective maintenance operation instead of chasing new orders. But despite this, the ownership of the Sukhoi Civil Aircraft Division was transferred to the Irkut Corporation. The name Sukhoi was dropped from the name, and down the line, it was called just the Superjet 100. The Yakovlev Bureau took over the development instead. Meanwhile, CityJet started to get rid of its now called SJ-100s, and Interjet only had 7 out of its 22 airframes operational. The future was bleak for this aircraft. But it was something that happened in the 2020s that put the nail in the coffin. As sanctions became a noose around the neck of Russia, especially before the invasion of Ukraine, the maintenance of the Superjet became an even bigger issue. Interjet actually filed for bankruptcy in 2020, and they couldn't even sell their old SSJ-100s. Nobody wanted this jet, even at a bargain basement price. Well, except for the Russian airline companies. Even though Russia's largest operator, Aeroflot, transferred its fleet to Rossiya Airlines and other smaller companies. Meanwhile, the production rates slowed down significantly between 2020 and 2022, thanks to a lack of those Western-made parts. In 2022, after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the sanctions became so tight that it absolutely obliterated the program. The French engine manufacturer Safran cancelled their contract with the Russians, and so did the other companies which supplied parts for the SSJ-100, so it was left without engines, parts, and with a limited stock for future orders. And to top it all off, the European Union revoked the certification for the Superjet to fly over Europe. So this jet was pretty much doomed, right? Well, yes, but also no. Let me explain. Even back in 2021, the Russians started to develop the SJ-100R, a variant which would replace all, or at least most of the key components made abroad with domestic versions. This jet had its first flight in 2023, a bit with old SAM-146 engines instead of the new PD-8 Russian-made ones that were planned. Because as you guessed it, and as I hinted earlier in the video, they were not ready yet and would have delayed the program. Sanctions hit hard even with the domestic market, and that Rossiya Airlines, one of the largest operators of the SJ-100, feared that their operational rate may drop to only 40% of its fleet due to a lack of spare parts in 2023. But during the same year, only one new airframe was delivered to the customers, even though there was a decent backlog of orders. So flash forward to today in 2025. Things are starting to look a little bit less bleak for the future of the Superjet. Russian sources cite that the new PD-8 engines are finally delivered for the first batch of new airframes, and a total of 22 new aircraft should be completed with new, all Russian-made components. But to sum it up, a total of 229 airframes have been built so far, a far cry from the original projections made by Sukhoi of 800, and even the lower number, 600. And out of these 229 airframes, only 145 are still in service today. And even though there is some 100 orders in the backlog, mostly for domestic market and Iran surprisingly, the question remains, are they ever going to get these fulfilled, and what's the future of the Superjet? Fascinatingly though, it is interesting how a well-versed aircraft developer such as Sukhoi couldn't develop a seemingly easier aircraft than their usual fighter jet portfolio, and proves just how complex it actually is to build an airliner. But most of all, how maintenance and a network of support centers can make or break a new aircraft. The SJ-100 is one good-looking aircraft, but good looks are far from being enough to compete against Boeing, Airbus, and the other civil aviation giants. And you can bet that the Chinese Comac is making notes. Thanks so much for watching this video, and be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next video.